Education, stories and news. You're listening to the UHP podcast, brought to you by the communications team.
And that was my decision. I now want to be a nurse. I'd seen it, I was in hospital for 3 months and I saw everything I wanted to reassure me, I suppose, that was my momentary, that's it, that's what I want to do. And that shaped me.
I actually proposed to my wife, who was a nurse, and she proposed in the cupboard, on level 6.
In the cupboard?
We called it the cupboard. I mean, it was probably about half the size of this room.
It almost reflects the changes in society, doesn't it? It's, you know, this sort of care of the family thing, you know, if you go back to when we first started, people with their families, the families providing care for their other relatives, and the world's moved away from that really, and the Western world particularly.
That's because we're all working, look at us.
I used to go by Florence Nightingale saying, to be a nurse, you must have a heart that never hardens, a temper that never tires, and a touch that never hurts. Now, by those guidelines, and you can't go far wrong.
Hello and welcome to a special podcast where we celebrate the NHS 75th birthday. I'm joined here today with some of our longest service at University Hospitals Plymouth, who between them have over 270 years of service to the NHS. And we'll be looking back at the last 75 years and looking forward to the future as well. So, let's go around and introduce ourselves.
Hello, my name is Craig Bibby. I'm the Medical Devices Investment Manager. I joined the Trust in 1975.
I'm Tony Shute. I'm a registered nurse. I'm now working as a clinical nurse specialist, and I started my training in 1974.
I'm Graham Richardson, I'm an information analyst, and I started in medical records after training scheme back in 1982.
My name's Helen Harris. I'm a senior sister on the neonatal intensive care unit here at Derriford, and specialism is clinical governance.
My name is Marion Roach. I started my training in 1971 at Fields Hospital. I'm a staff nurse and I work on paediatrics.
Hello, my name is Wendy Colley. I have been in the NHS since 1983, started as a pupil nurse and currently am an NHS manager here within Plymouth as a continuum service.
Well, thank you everyone. It's amazing to have you here with us today as we celebrate your 270 years of service. So, Marion, just you alone has given over 50 years of that. How does it feel to be surrounded by people that have also dedicated their lives to the NHS?
It feels very, very worthwhile, and I'm very privileged to have known all these people, not known all these people, all these people that have worked in the NHS, and I'm delighted that we're all here to share this.
And how does it feel for the rest of you as well?
It's good, like I said, it is a privilege. I mean, we're all here because we all could have gone and worked anywhere else, but NHS is just part of it, really, isn't it? You just don't want to go anywhere else.
I don't know where the time's gone, to be honest. Yeah. It still seems like yesterday.
It certainly doesn't feel that long, does it?
No.
So cast your mind back to the very first day of your job in the NHS, your very first role. How did it feel when you walked in that day? What did it look like? What did it smell like? I know that for you, Helen, you said about how the uniforms were so much different back then. Can you describe what it was like on your first day?
Yeah, I mean, we had our blue and white check dresses. You had, as a student nurse, you had different colour belts, and then when you qualified, you had your navy blue belt, which is something everybody looked forward to getting, and your silver buckle. That was a really big thing when you qualified. You could have an ornate silver buckle, which often your parents bought you as a graduation present. We had sort of epaulets as a student. The white paper hats, which we always wore, which were forever getting knocked on bed lights
All the time.
which are most useful for bribing children to do things they didn't want to do.
And we had cuffs as well, didn't we?
It was only sisters, all sisters had cuffs on my ward. When you're a ward sister, you're allowed to have a cuff and a nice little doily on your head, a nice material hat.
With your first moment of walking in, how did everyone feel on that first day of their job?
Terrified. I think my memory is on the first day, I mean, it was as a student nurse, we had to congregate in the nursing home at Freedom Fields in uniform, which of course we'd never worn before, and be greeted by a very old school home sister that was there in the thing checking how we looked, and then we were route marched to the school. Just terrifying.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, I was 16, just straight out of school, really. Didn't have a clue really what the NHS was about or how it worked or anything like that. Because you didn't know it, it just came in. And, yeah, so I think that, terrifying. It's probably good.
I had a shining white belt. There was no doubt whatsoever that I was a newbie. So part of that was, thank goodness, because they're not going to ask me anything. And the other thing was, oh my goodness, I'm going into this huge hospital. And it was Greenbank at the time, so we were back. But it was great because they were families.
Yeah.
You walked into a family,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't matter how nervous you felt or how many times you might have made little mistakes, or they looked after you. They really brought you. Your training was your Bible, really. So yeah, I think that's why we've
And it
all
wasn't
stayed.
just it was the porters, the electricians, everybody was welcoming, like, you know, they really did encompass you into a good,
They did.
like you said, it was like family, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was lovely.
My first job was in the Russian at Greenbank Twin Fields. So
Yeah.
part of my role was to go down there. And it's really interesting because we're very sort of thinking back how quickly I learned how the hospital worked in terms of patient flow. So it's easy. All I was doing was delivering the mail, but you would go to the medical records room, pick up the notes, take them to the secretary's offices. You did the prepping for the next day. You go and get them from there, taking their right patients, then back to the secretary's office, and you learn very quickly how the patient flows worked. And, you know, there was a period in there in the NHS where everybody was doing management courses and talking about networking. I have to say, that's probably the best networking I ever did.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's why we rely on all elements, I suppose, as clinical staff. We can't do without. Well, the porters used to wash my car at night at Greenbank. I used to slip them a couple of quid and say, "Would you mind washing my car?" Yeah. So it was all that, and that's the family I was talking about.
Yeah.
You know, they'd nip down to Mutley Plain and do the supper run for you, but that was part of that family, wasn't it? And as we go through change, I think we all get better at it. Whether that's just because we're getting older, I don't know, but.
Become more accepting, I suppose.
I don't have that fear as much anymore
No.
about going through change.
Yeah.
But when we were young, I think, coming here certainly, I think it was a big move.
So I worked at them when that was shut when this place first opened. I started coming out just before it opened. But actually sort of helping commission the theatres. Thinking of it now, the first thing we wanted was what we really did with the space. It was huge.
Yeah.
And literally only probably between a third and a half it was built. And so coming up before that, I think we opened 3 theatres of the 8 that were built at the time. It was just crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Now we've got 34 theatres.
You said about the
Huge.
porters and that. I remember we shut down for the theatres within about a year. We were just maintenance. We played volleyball with badminton and drip stands. The stores entrance down the bottom. We had to try to do that.
Yeah, I do feel for some of the very young people and how they need to be nurtured and how we felt. So trying to wrap your arms around them and bring them on is really tough when the wards are so busy.
I think in some ways we were better prepared as student nurses.
I think we probably were.
We did our drug assessment in our second year of training. So from the second year of training, we could be a second checker of drugs. So you were used to doing drug rounds before you qualified. And we had a management placement our last year of training. I was on nights at Mount Gold, and I was in charge of the ward with a bank nurse and an auxiliary. And that was
routine
night sister
for us,
coming
though,
round, and that
wasn't
was your management placement. So you were used to sort of being in charge and doing drugs and things like that. Which is just as well, because my first shift as a qualified nurse, somebody went off sick, and I was in charge of the ward.
It's frightening.
And that was a children's birds and plastics ward, and I knew nothing about birds and plastics
No.
because it's the day I qualified. So I had to ring the adult ward and say, if we get a child with a burn-in, could you just come up and help me, please?
Yeah.
I think that leads on quite nicely to how, while the jobs have changed quite a lot, as we've just kind of talked about, how the services have changed. You know, there's been obviously quite advances in medicine, there's different treatments and tools, but also in technology as well. So it's changed dramatically the actual landscape of patient care over that time, and also how we support our staff.
I don't think there was any technology in the early 70s, not like we use today.
I remember when I was working at Devonport, I was a trainee OBM, or the peers that I had at the time, and in my second year, it was a 2-year course, I was down at Devonport, and it was myself and one really, we used to share the call, so I'd be on call for the emergencies without being qualified, and very often we did end up working with an SHO anaesthetist who'd been doing it for about 12 weeks, and then shut out on their own. No help anywhere. The nearest help was ICU, which was up at Freedom Fields. And in the middle of the night one day, we did a appendicectomy. I went out with cystic fibrosis. And at the time, I think he was nearly 20, which then was just, unheard of probably for him to live that long. And we took his appendix out about 1 o'clock in the morning, and they decided to transfer him up to Freedom Fields to intensive care. No paramedics, didn't exist in those days, turned up with the ambulance. I got in with the patient, there was no monitoring, I was trying to hand ventilate him and keep my finger on his pulse at the same time. And he's a lovely chap, I've never met him before, he's a registrar, and he didn't get in the ambulance. And I thought,
Left you to
oops,
it.
so he come in, he said, no, and he wouldn't leave his moped. And followed us up the road. He said, I have a problem, you stop. I think I've got a problem, I can feel this guy's pulse. Yeah, it's horrendous. Yeah.
It's really strange.
It's really scary. But yeah, I mean, and now you can't move a patient from theatre to recovery if they're intubated with an entire CO2 monitor. They won't do it. Yeah, they would do it. I mean, it's really, incredible. Similar names, whole conversation, but we did a gynae list one day, and it was I wouldn't call her elderly, she was a middle-aged lady who came in for an exploratory laparoscopy for a swelling, abdominal swelling with a gynaecologist. And we're talking the days before ultrasound, and they put the lady to sleep, put her on the operating table, just about to do just made the incision, and the anaesthetist looked up and said, well, it'd be really funny if she was pregnant, and she was. Done a laparotomy just to show that this lady was pregnant, because just ultrasound didn't exist. It was probably on its very early stages.
I think the diagnostic capability now is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And having seen the robotic age enter this trust, and gosh, I can only imagine in 20 years' time what that might look like.
Yeah.
And I think made a joke earlier about AI, the technology that is possible, not always affordable, but possible, blows my mind.
When I started in medical records, I think one of the reasons why they were taking on some new staff is because they were literally just about to start putting over medical records. Because at that stage, we had a whole bank of filing cabinets with little, I think they were about sort of 4x3 inch cards, and everyone was handwritten onto one of these cards. So you get, sort of like John Smith has just been admitted, can you find the notes? And about this deep to try and find the right John Smith. Technically they're all in, but in any sort of like filing system like that, they were never always going to be correct. And then you'd have to physically go and find the notes, and the whole, now you can't imagine trying to do our job. And outpatient clinics, back in those days, the clinic list was literally an A4 sheet of paper. And if somebody cancelled, you would Tipex their name out or put a sticker over it, so then you could write somebody else in at that slot. Because you literally had one line for each outpatient appointment. And sometimes there'd be something heavily over Tipex or stickered out.
We've definitely advanced in surgery, haven't we? Because I remember when I worked on my first surgical ward in Greenbank, They used to do these operations on, I think it was called a transurethral prostatectomy, when we were running around putting bags up, emptying bags, and all this blood was coming out of the patients, and we had to change the bags really quick. And I remember thinking, how barbaric is this, like, you know?
Then there was a time, I'm sure you remember, both surgery and medicine, if you had a heart attack, you were on 10 days bed rest. You weren't allowed to move, literally.
Yeah.
Now, 24 hours and you're out of bed, 48 hours, you're home.
You're gone.
Yeah.
Tremendous change.
Hospital stays have just changed that whole recognition, isn't it?
Changed.
Same with cesareans, wasn't it? You were in
Yeah,
the 10
you
day
were-
week.
Same thing,
Yes,
wasn't it?
And now you're out
You're right,
next
yeah.
morning.
Get up. Get.
So, yeah.
The job that we do is very, very different. You know, in nursing, I think back then, nursing meant, you know, bedside caring. As technology has come in and knowledge is advanced, we've become very different beings in nursing, for sure.
Definitely.
There's no comparison.
I mean, I trained as an enrolled nurse, and the whole reason I wanted to be an SCN
It's the care.
was to care.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a registered nurse, which is, I opted to do my SCN training because that's what I wanted to do. That was my desire. And I wanted nothing else. My aspiration was to wear that white hat, paper hat, wash people, feed them, and make sure that they were cared for. I very quickly realised that actually, as a registered practitioner, I can still do those things, and then had to do your conversion course, which we used to do back then. But that was my one desire for many years.
I think it was a lot of people's vocation years ago, wasn't it? I mean, well, I used to go by Florence Nightingale saying, to be a nurse, you must have a heart that never hardens, a temper that never tires, and a touch that never hurts.
Yeah,
Go by those guidelines and you can't go far wrong.
I still think to this day, nursing was always a vocation rather than a profession for us.
It was.
Now it's a proper profession, isn't it? It's academically, it's well respected.
Yeah.
And you're right, nursing has changed completely. The whole world has changed. Your world's changed into a technological world. Your world's become a digital world. So it's almost unrecognisable. If I could look back in 20 years, hoping I'm still alive, of course, I can't imagine what that change would be.
It almost reflects the changes in society, doesn't it? It's, you know, this sort of caring for family thing, you know, if you go back to when we first started, people lived with their families, the families provided care for their relatives, and the world's moved away from that, really, isn't it? In the Western world particularly.
That's because we're all working. Look at us.
Yeah.
I can't care for my family. I'm here.
I think theatres were renowned for practical jokes. As student nurses, we had to practice scrubbing up.
Yes.
And the surgeon's favourite trick would be to hide a pair of forceps. He usually used to put them on the back of our uniforms, clamp them on, and then he'd ask you if everything was present and correct in your set, and if you had all your forceps and you had all your swabs, knowing there was one, and you'd be frantically trying to sort of count them all.
We did have lots of fun though, didn't we?
Yeah.
We did. Yeah. We probably were a bit naughty on occasions, really. But
the pace was so different. I think there's no comparison to the pace of working life now to then. And I know in radiotherapy, when I was a staff nurse, we used to send patients home a lot on a weekend leave for those who could. And it was so quiet that we had an auxiliary on the odd occasion who cooked Sunday dinner in the kitchen. And they sit down in the afternoon. I mean,
well, no.
There's absolutely no
absolutely no.
Yeah.
I can remember getting into a skip bag once, the old-fashioned linen bags, and waiting for the auxiliary to come and deposit the skips after the background. And I was going to jump out at her, which I did. She ran, she screamed loud, ran down the corridor, and promptly woke up the whole ward. I was like, oh my goodness me. I wasn't meant to do that. I'm absolutely terrified. And I've done some real unpleasant practical pranks on our auxiliaries. But it's interesting, I met a few of them last week. We went out to lunch, and every single one of them remembers the fun times rather than the awful times.
Yeah.
We had some really bad times, but from a patient, like you said, the pace of life was changing, wasn't it? And but it was interesting. They remembered the quirk, the humour, the teamwork. So I felt quite reassured coming here today to be able to do that. I don't know where the time's gone, but the memories I've got predominantly when I eventually do retire are going to be good.
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember when I started on the medical ward, and there was a nurse called, Bob Pask. Do you know Bob Pask?
Yes.
Yeah, well, he was my mentor, and I went onto the ward, and he said, right, Marion, he said, would you like to go around and collect all the patient's dentures and all their little pots? So to collect all the dentures, take them into the sluice, and he promptly emptied them all into a bowl. And he said, you've got to clean them now. I said, but I'm going, but he said, oh no, just go around and try them all out on the patients. So I had to go try and take them all around to the different patients I took them from, without the sister seeing me, and he was in the background laughing. He obviously told all the patients he was going to do this, so it wasn't a surprise to them, it was horror to me,
So they were all on joke as well?
Yeah, they were all on the joke as well.
That's terrible. That's nasty.
It was, right? But I thought, if nursing's going to be this fun, I can do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he made light of my nervousness and my anxiety, so it was quite good, really. But he was a bugger. And then we had a student nurse on, and he said, give that urine bottle to the student nurse to go and measure. So he said, give her that as well, to take measure. So I said, I've got to give you this. So she went into the sluice, she's looking at the draining board, and she came out and said, well, I don't think the draining board's long enough for me to measure the urine. And he said, oh, is it not?
Oh, so.
She didn't realise she had to put it into a jug to measure it, but he gave her a tape measure, so naturally she thought she had to measure it.
I'm sure over the last few years that you've had moments that have shaped your career, moments that have impacted you as a person that you still carry with you today. So I was just wondering if any of you would be interested in kind of sharing those moments with us today.
Mine goes back years. As I said, alluded to earlier, I was a patient on Freedom Fields, one of the adult wards, and then was moved to another ward. And they allowed me to set trays up for lunch. So they used me, if you like, to participate in some of the daily activities. And that was my decision. I now want to be a nurse. I'd seen it. I was in hospital for 3 months, and I saw everything. I wanted to reassure me, I suppose, that was my momentary, that's it, that's what I want to do. And that shaped me. I saw what went on, and that genuine caring for people. That relationship was really important, but that was the trigger.
My trigger was when my brother was admitted to hospital with bronchitis, and in Kent that was, and he was really, really poorly. And we used to be allowed to go in and see him, and I used to see how the nurses cared for him, and I thought, I really like this job. I want to be a nurse one day, So from about the age of 11, that's what I wanted to be, and that's what I aspired to be, And then my teacher said, Campbell said, if you want to be a nurse, he said, you better get better grades than you're getting. So I worked hard, and I got the grades I wanted to be a nurse, So, yeah, and here I am.
Many years later.
All those years later, yes. Yeah.
Nicely, of course.
I guess that's the thing about this job, isn't it? Because even me, sort of completely non-medical, I mean, Derriford hospitals, it touches our families, and you can't not know somebody that hasn't, had their life saved or whatever, sometimes not. But it just touches so many things. I mean, my son was born, like I said, extremely prematurely and was in NICU for sort of 3 months. And just working while that was all going on, and actually having the freedom where I could pop down at any time because I was there in the building. And it's just, that's when it reminds you what this place is for. We're all here to do a job, but then every now and again you get those reminders of what that job actually is. And even as a clerical officer at the time, working in appointments, I'm just booking appointments, but it's all part of that whole system, and ultimately that's what we're here for, isn't it? It's just quite humbling sometimes when you see just what this hospital can do at its best.
I mean, we have to remember, don't we? We are the biggest employer as well.
Yeah.
We are bound to have users and family and our family here. You can't fail, but like you said, know somebody, either a service user, a patient, a carer, a loved one, a family member. I even married one that works here. I mean, that's going above and beyond, isn't it? So
Same here.
the relationship bit is like,
Yeah.
you're not going to marry somebody from work? Well,
Oh yeah.
you know.
Me too.
So
you married somebody.
Well, I married the gardener in the Naval Hospital. And then he became the gardener in Dover Hospital.
So that's 4 people who've met their partners.
I actually proposed to my wife, who was a nurse, and I actually proposed to her in the cupboard at Fracture Clinic on level 6.
in the
And
cupboard,
we called it
Right.
the cupboard. I mean, it was probably about half the size of this room, because it's where they stored all the equipment. So there's the plasticals and a lot of the sort of.
So in amongst a pile of crutches, you proposed to your wife.
Yeah. The clinic had just finished. It was on Christmas Eve, and I thought it'd be nice to do it. I mean, why I thought it'd be nice to do it in this double cupboard, surrounded by sort of like boxes of plastic caps and things like that. And then sort of like went down and sort of like go and see the rest of the nurses, because I think they had a bit of a do on, because it was Christmas Eve. So there's no clinic in the afternoon. We'll go down there and be nice to go and say hello, and guess what? And they all go home. I went into my medical records office and they'd all been told they could go, but because I wasn't in the office, nobody told me that I could have gone.
I had to ask permission, because I was a manager in the organisation, to fraternise with doctors.
Yeah.
That was frowned upon. I mean, you just didn't do it.
No.
And actually, I was his manager, so that was absolutely taboo. So I had to go and ask permission from the chief exec at the time, and I was like, it was going back, I was sweating, dry mouth, just like, oh my God, what if she says no? What am I going to do?
I'm not going to marry him.
He had to go to the medical director, and it was like, this is really stressful. But that was etiquette, wasn't it? I mean, I think it's polite to make sure people know, but yeah, we had to ask permission.
So I know you touched on it briefly, just talking about how we are such a large employer, but how does it feel to work for both an organisation like the NHS that is so well known and touches everybody's lives, but also somewhere like Darrowford and UHP, which is such a significant kind of landmark in the city as well?
I'm extremely proud to work for Dover Hospital and for the NHS. The years I've worked, I really am. How they've advanced the techniques and everything there. I'm really proud of my job.
We get some bad press sometimes, like everywhere else. But most people, once they come and have our experience, and if they need urgent and emergent care, this is the place to deliver that in spades. So I like you.
Yeah.
Very proud to work here. Very proud to sing the praises of the NHS, both in the city but also nationally.
Yeah.
I think we've got a great hospital with huge services that we deliver.
Amazing place.
Very proud.
Yeah.
Very proud.
It's frustrating sometimes, isn't it, when you just go home and it's all in the news and everything's all negative, and you sort of think, we've seen people's lives getting saved today.
Yeah.
People are still coming in, people are still being made better.
We have to believe in that we do something well.
We make a difference, don't we?
Yeah, we do
We make a difference.
and we have to hold on to that.
I don't think we'd
because-
be here though, would
Yeah,
we? With
no,
all our
absolutely
years of
not.
service,
Yeah.
would we have
Yeah.
stayed?
You must have seen a huge advance in treatments in oncology, and
Yeah,
I know I have over
yeah.
the years.
I mean, there is no comparison to what the treatments that we do today, care that we deliver, the numbers of patients we
Yeah,
treat, compared to right back at the very start.
Techniques are less invasive, aren't they?
Technology
Yeah.
allows you to do that sort of stuff. And treat more patients. I think for me, it was the biggest thing was probably the introduction of laparoscopy and all those sorts of things. It completely transformed what we did, because, I mean, when I first started doing laparoscopy, work was gynae for sterilisation. And clips on clothes, didn't they, on the tubes. But then when they started doing the laparoscopic cholecystectomies and mesh repairs of hernias and all those sorts of things, it totally transformed everything. And allowed you to do much more. It allowed you to operate on older people because of the advances in anesthesia. And completely changed. If somebody had an oversight, practical oversight, that would be surgery. Now they go down the endoscopy. It's that. And it's completely changed what we do, how we do it.
I think multidisciplinary teams have changed what we do. Is that, patients now are managed by a team who are specialists in what they do. It's teams of doctors, nurses, support staff, all who know the specialty inside out. And patients expect that, want that, and get that. I think that's made a real difference to cancer.
And I think there's something you touched on there about patient expectation is right at the very top of what we can deliver, I think, both financially, both from a care point of view, a safety, patient said, but their expectations and the relatives' expectations of, they are pretty high. So on occasions when we don't get it right for individuals, that's when we get lots of noise, isn't it? It becomes very emotive. But I think the patient's expectations are the most extensive I've ever seen in my career. And I think that's a magnificent change in what we've all experienced.
You look at the size of the whole organisation now, and I think when we started medical records and in the appointments office, I think there were 6 of us.
Yes.
And we did all the appointments. As I said, most of them on paper, but we did all the appointments while the Green Bank and Freedom Field, which of course then was the main hospital. And, it's just now, booking appointments, 4 or 5 people, there's probably quite a few, maybe close to 100 people doing it now across the whole of the hospital. And that's not just because they're extra jobs, it's because they need it, because we're incredibly busy. But the sheer volume of patients coming through and so many different services that we're doing now, it's amazing how much it's grown. When Derriford was first opening, it was very much on the outskirts.
Yes.
You had 1 hourly bus or 2 hourly buses on it,
Yes.
with one single bus stop on either side of the main roads. Like I say, it was about a half-hourly bus service, and they used to be a full transit shuttle van between Freedom Field and Postman, which ran sort of like backwards and forwards. So most nurses and so on would use that because that was the easiest way to get to Derriford at that stage.
When we closed Maristow, we shipped the patients up in a shuttle bus.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't any other transport.
It's interesting, what a lot of people don't realise, although Derriford opened, I think, in 1981. I mean, to be honest, until a few years before that, I wasn't even aware they were building it. But there was a lot of criticism of being seen as the north of the city. The plan was middle of nowhere, too expansive. So it expanded along the A38 corridor. So it was actually, as you say, quite isolated.
I think looking towards the future then, obviously we've got new developments happening, new technology happening all the time. What do you think the future looks like for the NHS? But also, what message would you give to somebody maybe joining now who hopes to have a career like yourselves?
Wow, what would you give them as advice? I think your statement was true, dear old Florrie.
Yeah.
To be able to still be that expert carer, to still have a family, to have some humour and humility, and have support to do that. Future of the NHS, I'm going to be a user at some stage, as we all are. I couldn't think of anybody or anywhere that I'd rather be treated than here. And I think that's a really important message.
The other message usually says, let us never consider ourselves finished nurses. We must be learning all our lives. One of those sayings as well. Dear old Flo.
I think that comment about being a user, having been a user a few months ago, I think I probably learned more about the organisation and the needs of the patients by being a patient myself.
I'm really thankful for the NHS for what they've done. So, very proud.
I think there's few occupations that are so respected. You tell people you're a nurse and where you work. There's instant sort of respect for what you do, and the gratitude we get from patients and their families. You know, we get so much positive feedback from the patients and their families, and
Yeah.
that's, you know, there's not very many careers and jobs where you get that consistent feedback.
I think looking
So that's
forward,
amazing to
we
have.
will have all seen significant changes at what I call the acute front face. Moving forward, I think there'll be a lot more partnership working, particularly around the MDT type environment, working with our GP partners, working with our social care, working with
Community in
dietitians, and the whole shift of patient care, I think, is going to go back out into those communities where we will become the very, very specialists, I suspect. And if they come here, they're coming here for something that's definitive treatment, curative, one would hope, or palliative on occasions. But I think we will see another significant shift back out to other healthcare providers, looking at prevention rather than cure. And we have made some steps in many pathways to that, but I think we've got a very big step to go. So I think that's where it's going to go. And patients will be offered to move location for treatment, and we're already starting to do that through mutual aid. I think there will be a lot more moving around, because younger people, as they need treatment or as we will accept that you might have to travel to have your operation.
I'm just hoping also that there's a huge influx of staff for mental health, because there's a very, very large mental health population out there now. A lot of children suffering, a lot of adults suffering, but there's not enough staff trained up to care for them.
Also, I think with Derriford and the location of Plymouth in particular, I mean, ages back when we were first trying to reduce waiting lists, and this is back in the day when waiting lists suddenly became political, and we were desperate, and we were trying to spend hours like phoning people, sort of saying, look, if you can get to Exeter for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, you can have a hip operation. I know and some people have been waiting for 2 years for this. And an awful lot of people would just jump at the chance. You always get a few, and then you kind of know the ones that really were desperate for it, because they would drop anything and go anywhere. But at the end of the day, Plymouth isn't the easiest place to get in and out of. And I know, you know, a lot of these policies, if you're in somewhere like London, you've probably got half a dozen other hospitals that can also do your operation within, you know, half an hour bus ride or whatever. With Plymouth, you can travel an hour to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And people don't want to. So I think Derriford will always be very much a central place, and it's unique these days with the size of it and getting bigger. Again, probably because the emphasis always seemed to be to sort of going on lots of smaller local units. But I think Derriford is just getting bigger and bigger because it needs to be. It's almost like a city in its own. I mean, that's what I would say when you sort of like clerical people coming in. If you're sort of like I did all those years ago, you walk into this office for the first time. I think back then you didn't have the information of what other departments were doing. You kind of had your own little area, and that was all. I mean, obviously you saw people in and around. Whereas these days, you know, all the communication, the websites and everything else, it's so much easier to find out what's going on within the hospital. So I think anybody coming in, watch out what's going on, because you might come in thinking you're just doing the booking appointments, but when you actually start looking around and see some of your opportunities for other jobs that you can go into and just soak it in. And, you know, back in those days, you got a job in the NHS and it was for life. You know, I mean, you had to do pretty bad normally to get the sack, provided you were reasonably competent. You know, it was one of those, back in the days when jobs weren't.
It's the thing, isn't it? You know, I mean, if you come in, like you out of school, you know, not particularly well qualified, if you come in to an organisation like this and you show enthusiasm and interest, there are opportunities for staff to develop. Right.
So many opportunities, so many different. If you think of all the varieties and different specialities, you can do anything. You can work anywhere. in the NHS.
And that's what's nice, you've got
And over
that
your
information.
career,
You can
sometimes
find
people
out about
change.
them now, and
A lot.
you know, and like I say, just go for it because it's a brilliant place to work.
It's a wonderful opportunity for
So
people
many different jobs
to
out
work
there.
in this organisation.
Yeah,
I've had 6 different careers in my 40 years, all with different qualifications, different experience.
yeah.
So, you know, while I really value my nursing, absolutely, I've been a tertiary services planner, I've been a bed manager, I've been a waiting list manager,
Yeah.
I've been a service line manager. So,
Tried them all out.
really different careers
Yeah.
in multiple departments. And I thought, shall I just have one more little go at something? Shall I?
I think across all of your careers, and there are a vast majority of job titles that you guys can put your names down to, some of which probably don't exist or don't exist under the same name anymore. I think one thing that you've had in common is you've all at some point had dealings with patients and focuses providing that support to staff and providing support to patients and the care to patients. Are there any kind of key memorable moments or key points with patients and their families that really stick with you?
We could probably all name at least a dozen, if not more, that are really, some of them happy, some of them not so happy. And we have to try and balance that as professionals, whatever role we're in. We could all recall that. I've cried with patients, I've cried with relatives, I've been to birthday parties, weddings, funerals. But I couldn't name one thing.
No, I've had quite a few deaths in children over the years and been to the funerals, and the funerals have been lovely. And people say to me, "How on earth can you work with children?" I said, "Because I make a difference, and I know I make a difference. I know it's sad, but I feel I need to be there for the families and for the children."
I'm sure we've all
Yeah.
got that experience.
Yeah.
So
I think some of the proudest moments is because we look after very, very premature babies on our unit, and I could now name a handful of the babies I've looked after that now work for the NHS.
Yes.
And that is lovely.
that is
Yeah.
absolutely,
That is
again,
lovely.
you wouldn't get that in any other profession, would you?
My son might yet be one of them because again, you know, he survived because of work, but you know, your department did always used to go home on Christmas 21 years ago. So.
And to have colleagues, you know, babies you looked after 25 years ago are now your work colleagues.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a nurse on our ward who I used to look after as a child, and she's a staff nurse now. Well, she's a sister now, actually.
Remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah. On our ward.
Yeah.
So we can't answer that, really.
Not easily.
Not easily.
It might be another show.
So I think you've shared some lovely stories, you've had some really lovely experiences, as well as some more difficult experiences. But as you said, it's the balance, and it's when you look back, it's the positive memories that you tend to think of first. So with 270 years of service to the NHS between you, first of all, thank you all for your experiences. And what, if you could kind of sum it up in a sentence, working for the NHS, if you were explaining to somebody who wanted to work for the NHS what it was like in a sentence, what would that be?
You'll have the best time of your life, and you'll meet many friends, have many sad times, but you'll also have wonderful, happy times.
Joy and variety.
Yes.
That's what it offers.
I think just have to embrace it.
Yeah.
And it might be an overused word or might sound a bit corny, but family. I mean, Darrowford's as big and as huge, and some might seem as an impersonal place. But Darrowford is still one massive sort of like family, and the people and the staff. We sort of like, I think we regretted when we left, sort of like good old Freedom Fields and Green Bank, you know, and then Darrowford seemed so impersonal, but it's still the same people doing the same jobs, coming in every day because they love the job.
My word for this place is loyalty.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's where I see
Loyalty and love of the job.
Yeah.
I think it's just amazing to be able to make a difference. Every
Yeah.
day you
To
come
make a
to work,
difference.
you know that you've made a difference.
Job satisfaction.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today, but I'm really grateful that you all joined us today. I feel really privileged to have you here. as we kind of celebrate the 75 years of the NHS so far, and look forward to hopefully another 75 years plus. Thank you very much for sharing this milestone with us. Thank you.
You're welcome.